So if I could please have all the presenters back on stage. We'll have those guys here since they're two from the same company, and take whatever seat you want.
I'll separate you guys. Okay. Don't want any conclusion.
Cool. So as usual, I'll start with a few questions, and then I will open it up to you guys. So one question that I often like to ask, and we'll go back to the analytics discussion in a second, but I'm interested, and I know from feedback that lots of people here are interested as well, in hearing just your personal entrepreneurial journey. This is, there's a lot of people here starting companies, thinking of starting companies. So what's your entrepreneurial story? How did you start? How did you come up with the idea? Why this idea? How did you find a co-founder? And so on and so forth. Whoever wants to start first.
Happy to go first, I guess. I don't know that my story is usual or unusual, but like I said, we began at Yale, so I was actually a business school student. I have a software background. I was a developer for about 7 years, getting an MBA, and I met Daniel Abadi. He was my co-founder. He's a young professor, same age, we're both early 30s, who was working on really his first big area of research as a professor. Actually, previously, his research as a PhD student became Vertica, if you know Vertica, analytic database in the market. So very smart, young researcher, disciple of Mike Stonebreaker, who's this sort of legend in the database field. I read his paper on HadoopDB, mostly just out of curiosity. I found it fascinating, and I met him. We hit it off really well, and I said, Dan, we have to commercialize this. This is where the market's going. There's going to be this convergence of sort of relational database technology and Hadoop, and this is the future. And he was like, nah, I just want to get tenure, But, after some convincing, we decided to do it. And I actually dropped out of business school, raised an angel financing in Connecticut from a number of people. It was about $1.5 million. We started small. We were like 6 people in New Haven, Connecticut. Then we did our much larger VC round and moved up to Boston. But that's really how we got started.
Sure. So I was running a company called Squarespace as a second person in, and we had a CFO actually copying and pasting from PayPal every night and from Authorize every night into a spreadsheet so we could see what the hell is going on, and that felt totally wrong. I was a data head. When I was a kid, I would evaluate prospective girlfriends in spreadsheets, so I always knew that. A very good story. Sorry, yeah. Just write that off the record if you can. But we decided that this was going to be a big category. As a category play, this is the next social, this is the next search. This industry is going to be monstrous. So we got together the best people we'd ever worked with and spent a month talking about culture, which was a really strange choice. And then we figured that making visualizations early was a good place to be and doing the same kind of stuff. And it's been a ride. It's been a great year and a half.
All right. See, I'm a lot older than Justin, and I didn't drop out of business school. I actually finished it. But this is ClearStory is my 6th company. The last 5 might go back to the early 90s. My first 3 were in the internet space, dating pre-Netscape. So did an application server company. We were bought by Netscape. After that, a company called LoudCloud, which turned into Opsware, so that was in data center automation. And over the last several years, have been in the big data space. Actually started in big data with working with Cloudera very, very early days when the team was first put together, and then was at a company called Astrodata that developed a big data platform that was acquired by Teradata last little over a year and a half ago. And how we arrived at ClearStory is basically the problem that we saw at Astrodata, which is a lot of companies were trying to bring data together from many different sources, both private and external sources, and were struggling with how to actually converge data and how to run an analysis in a very intuitive way. Most of the tools that you picked up, off-the-shelf BI tools would grind to a halt as you put it over large volumes of data and weren't designed for unstructured data types as well. So that's basically what led to the birth of ClearStory, is seeing the problem from back then. And really what we see today is, I think, a pretty dramatic shift in how people are thinking about data analysis moving forward, which is great to see. So I've actually been in the big data space now since very, very early Hadoop days, and it's been pretty fantastic to see the sort of change in people's thinking over the last 5 years. So we think this is just the beginning, and we hope to see a lot of companies continue to push forward in how they think about this problem and embrace it. So here I am doing number 6, and it's been a fun ride so far.
I wasn't smart enough to get into business school, so these two are definitely up on me. Simple Reach is actually my first real attempt at a business. I guess, like most people, I tried consulting and thought that was a business, but I guess you kind of have to have clients for that to turn into a business, which I'm sure business school would have told me. But I found I was actually it started as at a founder dating type thing, where my co-founder Ed Kim was talking about preaching about content marketing and how he thought that this was really going to be like the next evolution in ad tech, in advertising technology, and I thought he was right, but I had no idea how. So we chatted a bit, we got together, and we decided to give it a go. We started out by building an ad server for what's called real-time bidding, and this was about 2.5 years ago, right when real-time bidding was starting to really come into its own and start to take on a real good sizable share of the market. And when we found out that there were a lot of people ahead of us with a lot smarter teams, we decided we should probably start looking elsewhere. And we moved into using that same sort of technology to recommend ads, to recommend social ads. And then we moved from social ads into content. And we knew that there was something there in the content marketing, content advertising space. And it took us a little while to sort of come around to it. And the rest of that journey was where we took those social ads and said, here, we've got an algorithm. We built this great algorithm for content recommendation and for ad recommendation, and we based it on a whole bunch of factors like behavior and social media. And what we found is we kept getting asked the same question. How are you guys doing that social thing? We kept saying, well, you guys don't know, and nobody knew. So we said, well, let's show you. And that's how we did it. We just started showing people things that they didn't have access to. And what we found was that there's a lot of social media data that requires not only ingestion and cleaning, but also analysis and display. And that sort of led us into this space where we were looking at small amounts of advertising and content into larger amounts of advertising and content and even much larger amounts of social data behind that. So that's how Simple Reach was started.
What's your background?
Okay, well, it's funny how I ended up at Simple Reach. Actually, I initially intended to be a journalist and sort of felt like the writing was on the wall, and that there was this insidious things demolishing the wall, the separation between church and state, between advertising and editorial, and ended up studying math and statistics, and ended up working at a company doing analysis of content marketing, so sort of what I was afraid of in the very beginning. But I think my sort of instincts led me in the right direction. I just sort of mixed up who I was working for. So I think as an early employee of a company, what might be interesting for you guys to hear is just the perspective of what it's like to start at a company that sort of is still figuring out what the most useful thing that it could be doing is. And a lot of that, I work with a really great team, and we talked a lot. And you look at the numbers, you try to see if they match your intuition, you try to see if it's working towards you try to understand the space really well. We just have tried to really become experts and see what the market was telling us about, what type of company it needed. So it's been a really great process in that sense. But speaking more towards, there was a slide up here earlier, I think from your presentation, that 37% of analysts make decisions based on gut feelings. There have been a lot of times where the results of our analysis have not corresponded to our intuitions, and it's really hard to trust the data sometimes when it just goes against what you want to believe. But I think that's just a testament to our approach and what we've been doing.
Thank you. So that leads us back to the actual analytics discussion. So, so far it looks like most of the analytics solutions that have been on the market were essentially sort of point solution, best of breed, and the approach has already been people trying to figure out, how to put Tableau on top of a database, or other sort of gluing things which actually were probably not meant to be glued together. And now there seems to be an evolution where an increasing number of companies offer end-to-end, sort of one-stop shop type solutions, including both of you, Clear Story, and I guess some to large extent as well. Help us understand what the trade-offs are. Is there really an opportunity for one-size-fits-all? What do you lose by doing that? What are the benefits of having just adapt and putting something else, one of your partners on top? Help us understand how people need to make decisions.
Sure. So our system is a lot simpler than yours because we're narrower in the sense we're not complicating in-office data sets. So I think the limitation for us, the benefit for us is you get data back out in minutes. So you get an answer of all your social data, all of your revenue data. But we're also really shallow. So you can't actually drill into finding one customer issue. You can't incorporate your own spreadsheets. You can't bring in your own data set to get a deeper sense of what's going on. So I think for us, we definitely give people an instant sense of what's happening, and they can find those patterns really easy. And then they need to go to the smarter folks in a way that have the ability to drill in and sort of say, okay, I see there's a pattern forming here. I'm going to tie into a content system that shows me what's really happening. For our customers who are usually small businesses, $10 million, it's genius. But for bigger companies, they like us because it's a quick result, but it's not. There's a big trade-off there.
Yeah, so let me just also add on your point about point solutions. I do think that there's still obviously a place for point solutions, but I think that in the data space, this is a natural evolution, what we're seeing right now, where people started with point solutions where there was a specific application working against a specific data source or data type. And at that point, it made sense because some of these data sources and data types were new, and it was sufficient to just have a point solution to be able to look at something very specific and a very specific metric. Now, since data has evolved so dramatically, both in terms of the volumes people are storing in the corporate platforms and the rate at which data is evolving and changing from the external sources, there's a natural need for more flexibility in systems so that you as a user and an organization can determine what it is that you need to bring together from where and how you want to look at it, right? There's only so much that I think a vendor can do in terms of saying, this is how you need to look at your data, right? You all in your organizations are domain experts in your business. You know what you want to look at. You know the sources that are of value to you, whether they be internal sources or external sources. And in order to drive to the interesting insights, it requires a solution or new solutions that give you flexibility in terms of how you can actually get to it, what you can pull together, how you slice and dice it, how you interact with it. So I don't think it's necessarily a case where a platform is going to do absolutely everything you want it to do with respect to every source and every type of analysis. That's impossible. But what one can do is give you a platform that's far more flexible than what the original generation of point solutions were all about. I think what Adapt is trying to do is very interesting because they recognize that bringing structured and unstructured data together is absolutely necessary, and it needs to be brought together in a single platform to avoid all the data movement between Hadoop and structured sources. But whether you're pulling data out of a platform like Hadoop or other sources, the users need more flexibility in terms of how they bring it together and drive to the insights that they know they need for their business. So we're basically riding a situation right now between platforms that need to house many different data types, which is what Adapt does, and solutions on the front end that need to offer flexibility to then consume all that data in the way users want to be able to do it.
So on a little bit more technical level, just to be clear, I actually agree with everything she says, but on a little bit more technical level, one of the problems that we had to solve was that we found that our users were very particular about knowing what they wanted, and they already knew in advance what they wanted. But the problem was that there was no particular system, one particular system that fits everything. So in other words, there's no one size fits all. And not wanting to steal your thunder or not knowing much about exactly what you do or how you do it, the thesis is that because there is no one size fits all, sometimes you have to cobble together various technologies. And what we did for us is at SimpleReach, we have like 4 or 5 different data storage technologies that we've cobbled together in order to provide both the visual real-time experience, the historical and analytical experience, and also the algorithmic insight that is interesting, that's basically providing the feedback that one would expect to intuitively know in a presentation format. So in other words, using the tools that are out there and available to bring together all the different disparate data sources and data types into one umbrella, because the users, what we found is users don't actually care how you get them the data as long as it's really easy for them. If it's not easy for them, then they're going to just go somewhere else where it is.
I guess I was just going to add one other thing. It seemed like part of your question was also around, from a business model and go-to-market perspective, how are things different? You know, whether you're a kind of an end-to-end solution or more of a platform play. And I think that's an interesting trade-off you make as an entrepreneur as you're building the company. Which way do you want to go? And certainly, it creates a different dialogue with customers. I think if you have a pretty face on front of it, the way that a lot of these guys do, you can communicate more directly to the business user and sell to them. As opposed to, for us, IT is going to be involved in some way and ask questions like, do you support disaster recovery and authentication and high availability, and can I do an active-active data center deployment, and ask different questions. Now, the flip side to that is we can charge higher prices. Our average selling price is probably a lot more, but we're going to sell fewer of them, and it's going to be to a more specialized audience, whereas they can go directly to a marketing professional and say, here's a solution. So just some other pros and cons.
That's good. The related question to this is there's a theme that runs across all your presentation around the democratization of big data, essentially offering solutions that enable either end users or a larger group of programmers, in your case, to access and utilize big data. Same question, help us understand the trade-offs. I mean, can you really build tools that every single business analyst is going to be able to understand? What do you lose? You mentioned that you have still you enable a very iterative process, but that's typically the province of data scientists who are able to query the data and get the data to almost suggest hypothesis, and that's something that's very advanced, that take many years to refine. How are we going to end up with a situation where in a company you'll have very specific big data analytics products for data scientists and then other products for the broader business audience, and how does it end up not being a mess?
Yeah, I think the key here is the handoff between the IT group and the data scientists to the business side of the organization has to change. Today, if you continue to rely on IT and data scientists to do every bit of data access and data analysis, it's going to slow down what business users need to see and when they need to see it. So what I think we all acknowledge is that IT will continue to play a very critical role here, and that they are the keepers of these big data platforms and some of the very highly secure data warehouses, etc. But what has to change is basically the handoff from IT and from data scientists to the business user, where business users can then pick it up quicker and actually have the ability to drive through analysis in a more self-sufficient way. So the two groups, I think, continue to exist. It's just the process by which things move from the IT side of the house to the business user needs to change. The other side of this is that business users are getting smarter in terms of what they need to look at. They are relying on data more to make their decisions day to day, And so there's a greater urgency on that side of the house in terms of what they need to see, when they need to see it, and more awareness of what's available that they can get to. So they're actually putting a lot of pressure on the IT side as well to unleash data faster to them than it was made available before. And when it comes to external sources, IT should not necessarily have to be in the way, right? There are lots of external sources out there that business users should be able to tap into when they need to see it. But when it comes to corporate platforms, new big data platforms, the handoff has to change from what it's been in the past, which has been a sort of a slow-moving train and more difficult to do.
I would also just add, I mean, we have, I guess, 20,000 active businesses, and there's about 70,000 active customers. And it's all Fortune 50 companies to the small mom and pop companies, and it's only because the whole industry sucks. Like, we're definitely not, I totally agree that down the road there should be really powerful tools for the big companies and small tools for our small businesses who just want to get a handle on it, and they make the decision. They're never going to hire an analyst. But because the tools are so weak, we find giant companies, top 10 companies, putting our tools on just so they can see the social landscape in one shot, right? That's crazy. Why are they giving us all their data? It makes no sense. But there is space for it to grow. There's space for everyone to have a part of that cycle, whether you're the business guy or you're the analyst closer to the business guy. That's definitely going to get interesting.
So I think one of the keys that we've found is that there's a lot of people that have access to analytics, right? Like whether it's Google Analytics, whether it's Omniture, whether it's any of the analytics solutions. But the key investment that's required in analytics is time. And that's time on the development side, that's time on the business side. There's just a huge time. You just have to it takes time to learn the API. Point is time, right? So you get that. What we've learned is that if you don't force people to take that time to learn all the analytic solutions and you surface the insights for them, sometimes you may miss one or two things, but if you do 60, 70, 80% of surfacing those insights for them, they're going to be thrilled because that's less analysis that they need to do on all of their data. That's less time that they're going to have to pay people to build out the extra solutions. And that's more time that they can just spend looking at whatever tool you've created for them, whatever visualizations you've created for them. And sometimes, even with analytics, even if somebody is a quant or specializes in analysis, they may get the question wrong. And what's really important oftentimes isn't the answer, it's the question. So the fact is, we, probably all of us, spend a ton of time thinking about the questions that involve not only our industries, but the industries of the clients that pay us to be good at what we do. And by surfacing the answers and the right questions, we give them the ability to do what they're better at, not have to think about how to mine their data and use the analytics. So really it's the ability to determine what the important questions are, and that's where the data science comes in. Like, that's where having a great data science team is really important, because they know the space, they understand the numbers, and they can surface those analytics and take the time that the quants and the analysts at the other companies would normally spend.
So I mean, while I absolutely agree with you, what we do at our company is not a general use case. I mean, sitting on top of 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Let me start over. I think in general, there's going to be a growing movement towards people being more mathematically literate in the same way that literacy had a big push before. I would like to see more people, in the weeds working with data. When you get to stuff at the data science level, the really big data, sure, that does require a lot more intensive background, a lot more mathematics, a lot more statistics. But in general, having these tools accessible would be really nice to see. I think that there needs to be a change in the attitude along with that, and understanding that they can shape intuitions, but they don't necessarily, if you don't have a really strong background, I would be uncomfortable with someone making, decisions purely based on that without some extra background. Obviously, they hired me for the math and not for the talking, so sorry about that.
This is great. I mean, it's actually going to create interesting tensions within companies, right? Because data scientists who have this very specialized knowledge and, who are sort of on top of the world right now, will want to defend their turf, presumably, and maybe they will come sort of in the way of a analytic solution that would essentially do sort of 80% of their job, and enable people that don't have the background to do it. So it's going to be an interesting tension, and I'm curious to see how that's going to evolve.
What I'm really curious about is, a huge part of what we do is cleansing the data and just sort of the data hygiene process, data hygienist. It's really hard. It's not clear. I'm not sure how you would automate that process. I truly have no idea how that would work. It's just because it's such a case-by-case
thoughts
scenario.
on this? Because
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Or how do you guys do the data cleaning? Because you mentioned, Sharmila, there's a whole part of it which is data processing.
Yeah. So
right?
just to clarify, so everyone is on the same page contextually. The problem is that there is no guarantee that the data that you're getting is accurate, especially if you're using APIs for public consumption, and even private consumption APIs. Like if you're, for instance, real estate data, if you're just handed tons of spreadsheets, like who's to say that everything in there is accurate and sensible? Like what if you get a building that has negative 3,000 square feet? Like that's an incredibly obvious one that's wrong, but sometimes there's things that are not so obvious. So in the social space, like we look at millions, hundreds of millions of events every day. What is wrong and what isn't? Like, is something getting 5,000 likes in a day right? Is it wrong? Like, you have to understand the context. So ours, again, like she said, is a very specific use case. But cleansing data and understanding what is correct and incorrect about the data, it becomes a vastly more complex problem when you're dealing with structured or unstructured data.
Yeah, when our approach is when it comes to your corporate data, you all are experts in your corporate data, right? So you know what you've stored, you know why you've stored it, you know the repositories that have the valuable data, you know the files that have the valuable data. So that's really relying on the domain expertise of the internal folks in the company to know what corporate sources are of value. When it comes to external sources, our approach is to work with the trusted sources. I talked earlier about thousands and thousands of external sources available, but the reality is, like you said, there are a lot of them that are not that interesting or not that valuable or have junk in it. And so what is also happening is that the ones of value are starting to bubble to the top, and there are a large collection of trusted sources that most companies are gravitating towards. And those are the ones that we, for instance, focus on, where we remove the complexity from you having to know how to get to each of these and each of their unique APIs, et cetera, and bringing those to surface so that you can converge that with your private data sources. That landscape will continue to change, but the key is as a company and as ClearStory, our job is to surface to you the ones that are of value so that you're actually working with trusted sources versus ones that may not be as high quality.
Great. So one last question from me, and then I will open it up to you guys so that if you have maybe a good time to start thinking about your question. So there's one quote that I read recently by Jeff Jonas, who from IBM, that I'm sure you guys know as a industry luminary. So the quote is, so it's about big data and small data. So new analytic prediction for next year. New analytic methods will be discovered while wrestling big data to the ground, and they will get repurposed and become useful on small data. So what do you guys think about this? So we have Dane, whose company is working in the world of small data, which sounds awful, but basically, in a big data context, but fundamentally is the reality of just about 90% of companies these days. So a smaller data set that people need to make sense of in real time for very important business decisions. So there's no other term than small data, but that's sort of what it is. And so you guys work in the big data world. So are those two completely different things? Are we starting to see some innovation of the big data world that's sort of trickling down or going into the world of small data? Are those completely different things? Are they converging? Any trends, thoughts?
I mean, I think for us, so we obviously, our clients individually usually have pretty small data. In aggregate, we have a lot of data. I think that we've learned a lot of practices in the sense of creating our own stack that can compress huge amounts of data and put it into an interface in a few seconds. It's a technique that will probably become more universal. One thing that's been big from an explanation standpoint is we can look across all of our customers and come up with an average equation. So we can say this weekend was sucky for everybody, and then that's a big data answer because it's going across very large clusters. And we give to a small data person who's sitting in the shop and is like, I don't know, no one walked into my store this weekend. What happened? Right? So you're taking derived conclusions that sort of give them balance to the tapestry of their world that wouldn't have happened in their own ecosystem because they don't have the breadth of the data that you guys are dealing with, and bring it back to their own space. And then the practice of that is applying the discipline to what's the KI that's important. So you lift that KI and say, you know what, it's just traffic was down, so everybody's traffic was down, but sales are up because it's a holiday weekend. So giving them the real contextuality to it is tricky and useful. It'll definitely become, the practice is the most insane thing, sorry to ramble, but the most insane thing is when we show customers what their old and new customer equation is, it's shocking how small businesses have no clue, and as soon as they see that, all of a sudden their marketing budgets get split in half, right? They start spending money for new acquisitions, spending money to keep old customers, and it's a life change. It's a pattern that big data people have been using for decades, but once those small guys get it, they're actually smart enough to start remodeling their whole companies. It's awesome.
Yeah, I think the whole big data, small data discussion is really your own reference point, right? So, who's to say what's big for you and small to someone else? But I think that what is widely acknowledged is the diversity of data, whether it's big or small, and the fact that people are now trying to wrestle with more data types than they had before, and it demands basically new platforms to be able to do that, right? So I don't think it's so much an issue of, what are we defining as small data, what are we defining as big data? It's whatever you as a company are hunting for in your insights and the analysis that you need to go after. But I think that as companies here are innovating on new technology, our job is to actually make different data types now consumable for you and give you new platforms and new tools that know how to do that, because the last 20, 25 years was about a different time where it was structured, it was a predefined data model, it was a very different model on the front end for how you actually drive analysis and navigate through an insight. So data is the difference now is the diversity, whether it be big or small. The other issue, I think, is the rate of change. So I know that people refer to this as volume, variety, velocity, but if you dissect those words, we think the more interesting thing here is the variety and velocity aspect. I think Dane's been talking about his customers that are about the velocity and the rate of change. Obviously, Adapt is dealing with the variety. We're also dealing with the variety velocity problem. Whether it's big or small is your own reference point based on the kind of company you are and how much data you look at every day.
I'm not going to talk about size because I feel like she's covered that well, and it's usually not in my best interest. But yeah, I'll let you all simmer on that one. So, but the one thing I do want to say, and Zenab definitely knows more about this than I do, is that what we found is that even when dealing with large amounts of data, what you really are interested in is how the smaller set of data, smaller subset of data can be representative and insightful about the larger set. Because ultimately, isn't that really what statistics is about? Right? And I'm not going to pretend like I know statistics. It was taught way too early on a Monday morning and I didn't do so well. But in general, I do know that statistics is for representing and defining what large sets of data looks like using smaller sets of data. And that's what we try to do working with our larger data sets. But I think that's yours.
Sampling is always like a good start, a good way to approach things. And I think there's a lot of excitement over big data, but I wouldn't knock small data. It's really interesting and useful, and I'm trying to convince everyone in the world to use pandas for Python. It's great. So if anyone's interested in programming, you should look at pandas. It's really interesting. But there's a funny story. When I was in college, and this sort of relates to small businesses using data, I went into a bar and I was speaking with the owner about how they manage their inventory, and I was shocked. They didn't keep records of the average rate of consumption of gin. They didn't compute the standard deviations. They didn't do year over year, month over month. They didn't do any sort of retail inventory tracking. And I just was so confused, and I asked the owner, I said, well, then how do you know when to buy more alcohol? And the owner just looked at me and said, when we're running low, you know? So I think sometimes we get so self-obsessed and so excited about all this data, we forget that there are often simple solutions to these things that people who are experts in their domain, and in this example, you know, cafe owner, they do have other solutions that work.
Okay, great. All right, so as promised, thank you very much for all of this. As promised, question. So Robin has the mic.
Hi.
And could you start just stating briefly your name and company?
Sure. My name is Ted Angelis, and I have a consulting company.
With clients?
It just didn't work for me. That's all.
I do have some clients.
Good.
My, sorry? Oh.
No, it's on.
Sorry, yeah, I apologize. Is that better?
Why don't you use mine?
Okay, so my question is actually kind of what you touched on, Matt, and you, Sharmila, a little bit touched on it. I think the word that you used was the stress that is going on within companies right now because of all this data, and I'm finding kind of on the front lines a little bit that it's not just stress. It is almost like a territorial thing going on right now between IT and other parts of the company that are growing. And I guess my question is, you know, not who owns the data, but the company owns the data. But what do you do? What's the collective wisdom when, like, IT doesn't want to let go of the data because they think that might mean they're not as valuable and their jobs might be on the line, right? I mean, what do you do with that kind of, it's not even stress, it's more like a real conflict going on within companies. I mean, and the top executive is saying, get it done, you know. Any suggestions or collective wisdom?
I think it's, you know, the approach to how you allow people to access the data in a secure way and who is allowed to do it, right? So there is a set of people in that data pipeline from the repository that's housing the data all the way to the business user that's trying to get to it that is slowly evolving in terms of people actually being a little bit more open to how people reach it and how data moves through that pipeline. And it's going to take time. But at the same time, I think as you point out, the pressure from line of business and executives to see what they need to see quicker is causing IT to actually cooperate in ways that they weren't necessarily open to before. However, there is still definitely the need for new tools and new platforms to very much take that into consideration. So the concerns that IT has with respect to data security, who has access, what permissions they have, who can see it, when can they see it, needs to be factored in. So I think we'll see this change, but I don't think obviously this is going to happen overnight. It's too intimidating and scary for a lot of IT departments, and so you need to build into the system and the new solutions, mechanisms to allow people to actually do this, but in a way that is comfortable for IT with respect to the security, access controls, permissions you put in the system. That's exactly how we come in it, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys do host data, and I think you host the data, and Sharmila, you kind of do a little both, right? Because you can access. I mean, for us, we sell the software, so IT gets to own it at the end of the day. You guys have the data, and you're running HADAP there. So that's from a business model perspective, a decision we made early on, because I think for large data sets, you run into that apprehension a lot, where it could be a security issue, like Sharmila mentioned. You know, it may not simply be sort of bureaucracy getting in the way, but simply a security issue. You know, this is all of our sales data. You know, if we put it in the cloud, maybe, you know, it'll disappear or something. So, you know, that's kind of how we go about it. And I don't think that's going to change, you know, overnight. I think, unfortunately, right? I mean, I think that's definitely the future, but I think it's not going to change overnight.
I think there's a fundamental, like, just thought process problem here, and this is something that I've always believed, is that IT should be enablers, not naysayers, right? The fact is that money drives the business, right? So while IT folks want to work on cool stuff, they want to mess with data, they want to do all these things that really make them happy at the end of the day. The fact is, when the business says, we would like to do X, IT's response should not be like, no, that's not really what should be done. It should be like, let me see what the best way to do this is, not how can we slow down the process, how can we keep our jobs, how can we own the data. It shouldn't be about that. So I can't speak for other companies, but I know that when we have discussions at Simple Reach, the absolutely sometimes inane ideas that come across the table with, we should do X, my first response is not no. My first response is, let's think about if this is the right way to do things, and let's think about how to get this done. But no is not usually the correct answer from a technology perspective. Maybe from a business perspective, but not from a technology perspective.
I'll just throw one other thing out there I was going to say, which is I think it depends on what you want to do with the data as well. I mean, I think some of these companies have sort of figured out some of the analytics that you might want to do for you, but for other use cases, it might be a real proprietary advantage what you want to do with that data. So you may not be able to host it, with somebody else because it's really a differentiator for your business. You don't want other people to know what you're doing. So I think that's another factor to consider.
As a quick follow-up to that, are you guys aware of other companies other than, I believe, Facebook that have a central data warehouse where different businesses can access directly to experiment with data? Is that complete just Facebook, or is that the trend in the Valley?
No.
Or
I think it is a trend. I mean, I think Sears actually. There's been some interesting things written about Sears going in that direction, which you think of, major retailer. You wouldn't think they would be, compared to Facebook, but they are, and they're making huge investments in Hadoop and starting to get rid of all these different siloed data warehouses. So I do think that's the future.
Hi, my name is Matt Hogan. I'm from Dataku. My question is actually just specifically for Justin. Do you guys intend to roll out any tools or products that will be combining SQL with other non-relational databases, or are you going to stay kind of in the Hadoop world? And if you are going to stay in the Hadoop world, are there other tools out there that exist for the other non-relational databases?
So other non-relational databases like Cassandra and like just other NoSQL, Mongo. Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah, so I think at some point in the future we would be interested in doing that. But for now, we're very focused on the Hadoop ecosystem today.
There's actually a tool that's on its way to doing that. I think it's called Hoptoad, and I know that there was another company that was called Hoptoad, and they had a product called Hoptoad, and they had to be changed around. But there's a company that does that where you can put a bunch of non-relational databases together underneath, and then you can write SQL-like queries on top of it. It's something to do with toads. Might be wrong about Hoptoad, but I know it's something to do with toads.
Hi, I'm Aaron Franco. I'm the CTO of ClickSlide. We work with data on a daily basis, and there's a lot has been said tonight about small data, big data, data in general. I'm just trying to kind of put it into context for people who aren't actually data analysts. And I think Simple Reach said something about usable data. And I'm just wondering where, I think maybe for Hadapt it's a bit easier to understand, maybe even for Dane it's a bit easier to understand what is usable data for their customers. But I'm just wondering in context, what do you consider to be, because you have structured, unstructured, big, small data, and you're talking about making this data into quote-unquote usable data. And I can understand what that means for an analyst, but what does that mean for like a marketer or your business customer? Like what makes this unstructured or structured data usable?
Well, I think that's a case-by-case thing. I mean, ultimately, if you have... Yeah, so I don't want to speak for anybody else, but even within our product at Simple Reach, we have different people who have different use cases. So individual publishers may export their data into an Excel CSV, which will have 50, 60,000 rows and 75 to 100 columns, and that's a lot to work with. Maybe it's a week's worth of data that totals up to that much. Maybe that's a month's worth of data, but that could be a lot for some people to work with. On the aggregate scale, at Simple Reach, we work with a lot more data because we don't go just within that siloed version of what we call a publisher or a brand or an advertiser. So on the aggregate set, we work with billions and billions of structured and unstructured pieces of data, but it's a very, very individual use case. Data size is whatever you're comfortable with.
I think just to answer on that, from our side, we find that there is definitely an individual exploration, which is why the tools we all are trying to build allow you to explore. But there do seem to be some consistent KIs that people don't understand. Like just knowing your SEM turns out to be poor on weekends because you actually correlate your revenue to SEM in a real fashion, or your acquisition in Facebook is just driving up no new customers, it's just getting your old customers to buy, can change behavior. So we definitely try to know a lot of these tools try to show at least a few of those early wins where they say, okay, I can save 20% of my budget here because I really shouldn't be running my ads at 2 a.m. in the morning, right? Or I should be going after new customers because I'm only getting old customers and that budget didn't go anywhere. That kind of stuff seems to make people smile.
In terms of usable data, I would say, I know this sounds like a weird approach, but just try asking questions from the data. Like if you have a sort of business goal or thing that you're trying to understand, just trying to solve one simple question, like is this more predictive than this? And that's a good way to start a data exploration. You don't really know if something's usable until after you've turned it into some sort of actionable insight, right? So that's a good first step.
So, yeah, Tom Alt, Bloomberg. So one of the dangers in pushing the analytics farther and farther up the business chain is that at least for a lot of the more sophisticated analytics, if you don't understand the models and how they work, you can seriously misinterpret the result. So how do you propose to mitigate this?
Sir, was that me?
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
The way we do it at Simple Reach is we just try to make it almost like plain English, right? So the algorithmic insights that we surface, and while they're verticalized in the sense that they're intended for content marketers or advertisers or brands, we want everybody to be able to understand it. So if one of the developers looks at it and is like, well, I should spend, or it says you should spend 20% more of your content marketing budget on advertising on Twitter on Thursdays because it does better than on Facebook, that's pretty straightforward. Like it's kind of hard to misinterpret that. So making the analytics more complex it's only useful if the people who need to understand it can't understand it.
I'm Tony Bear with Elven. We're an IT analyst firm. I have a question specifically for Sharmila. I think you folks at ClearStory are onto a really pretty great idea, which is you're essentially kind of curating all these APIs that are out there that are sources to like gold mines of data.
Right.
What I'm unclear about is what exactly you're delivering. Are you basically delivering an API to like a real-time feed or a stream? Are you persisting that data and making this as a software as a service? How are you delivering this?
Yep, so we are delivering it as software as a service. The back end of the system actually deals with the curation of the data, the harmonization of the data, the processing of the data. Depending on what sources you're tapping into, we actually do different things. And we have a front end that is specifically designed to make it very intuitive, to drive an iterative analysis and drive an exploration. So what we know now that one did not know like 7, 8, 10 years ago is the nature of these sources and what's of interest in these sources. And so now that that has become more evident, we can actually build that into the system. And what we surface on the front-end application is some of that intelligence where you as the user don't have to actually figure out all the complexities of the sources, how to get to them. The focus is to allow you to actually get to them easily, whether it be the private sources or external sources, and then drive a converged insight. So the solution itself is a back end that's transparent to the end user, but the back end is actually doing all the mashups and the processing and has the intelligence behind it and according to the sources that we support. And the front end is driving a very intuitive, iterative process to drive at an insight. So we're very focused on making it easy for a business user to actually run through the whole process from the point of picking the data that they want to work with through to the point of actually arriving at the insight and then iterating on the insight. And it's a completely different model than what existed over the last 15, 20 years, and a model that I'd say could not have even been achieved had one tried to do this 7, 8 years ago, because there are just more known elements today than we had back then, right? And so the nature of some of these sources are more well known, the diversity in them is well known, the different data types are better understood. That allows us to now do this in a more intelligent way and put on top of it a front-end application that's built into that, where into that application we built a lot of the sort of the exploration and intuitiveness around how someone should drive through an insight. But I'd be the first to acknowledge that you couldn't have built this kind of thing 7, 8 years ago. There needed to be more needed to be known about the data landscape to build the kind of solution we now have.
Hi, Ben Reed from Elasticity. Talking about a lot of the maturation of the industry from where we used to be with these large enterprise solutions that were dealing with small sets of data, were very expensive, very time-consuming to implement, to where we are today, which is much more kind of closer to the business user and a very on-demand and lots of multivariate analysis. In that transition, it seems like there's a lot less emphasis on consulting than there used to be, where you have droves of people come in that obviously were expensive, but also were that sort of interface between what the application could do and the needs of the customer. Can you tell me a little bit more about your opinions on where consulting and that sort of translation in an ongoing capacity, whether it's consulting or adoption or whatever you want to call it, that relationship with the customer over an extended period of time, not merely implementation?
Yeah. So I think, at least speaking for ClearStory, we have a very straightforward way of looking at that, which is that at some point organizations are going to tap into sources of data that are not necessarily inherently supported by the system, but the system has the capability to bring that data into the mix, in which case a consultant may be brought in who has the domain expertise around that data or source of data and can bring it into the mix with all the other data that the organization wants to see and can help basically in the process of converging that in. The system itself has to allow for it. In our case, it is a system that allows for it, but there may be sources that one needs to bring in that are unique, more esoteric, very specialized based on what the customer wants. And in that case, a consultant may be brought in to actually help with the process, right? And to help not just converge it in, but then ultimately make sense of the insight.
I think, one of the trends here is to try to minimize the number of consultants, I think, necessary. And I think there's two types of consultants you could talk about. One is the IT consultant to make all this technology work, and the other is more the data scientist type of consultant. I think on the IT side, I think there's a lot of opportunity for consulting right now because these technologies are so new and so complicated and so hard to use. But I think as time goes on, companies like Adapt, which are really trying to productize it as opposed to, let's say Cloudera or some of the distribution vendors that do a lot of this consulting, I think over time things will become more productized and that IT consulting will decline. And I think that's just natural as the industry matures. But I think also from the data science perspective, I think that's another interesting area where there's incredibly high demand and not enough supply. I mean, the true Zainabs, and we have one at our company, his name's Ming Sheng. I mean, they're extremely hard to find. So I think that's an opportunity as long as these insights are not obvious to folks. But I think that's also what some of these guys are working on as well, is to try to make that easier to see, easier to visualize, even for the non-data scientists.
I think the one other point about consultants is that one of the things that consultants bring to the table, especially for organizations that are not used to having whatever the specific domain expertise that consultant brings, is typically process. So especially in the data science world, there's not a whole lot of process because people don't understand what a data scientist should be doing. It's like a cool job title, but there's not a whole lot of people are like, oh, I got a data scientist, now I'm a real company. And that's what we did with her. But there's actually a process that goes around it. And one of the things that consultants bring in that particular case is understanding the process and bringing the process into the organization in such a way that it allows the organization to not have to learn as they go. So that's actually a really big deal. The learning curve, removing that learning curve is sometimes way, way more valuable than the actual cost of the expertise brought in.
Although I would say if the consultant is being brought in because you fundamentally don't understand your customer, I would recommend that you find a different industry where you do. That seems like a larger problem to me.
I would also just add that I think there going to be more need for the data science consultants than ever, right? Because we're seeing your example of the cafe shop, seeing the change numbers, and then asking us who the hell tells me what to do with it, right? So this industry is going to need more than there will ever be population for. Maybe not the IT guys, but the other guys for sure.
Carter Schoenwald, I guess I'm the president at Well Posed. So one question, I think maybe all of you can answer it, but perhaps Justin might be best situated to sort of answer this. One thing I find is that a scenario I'm going to be having happen, I imagine probably you've all encountered, is you have an interesting business that on the face of it is going to reach out to you, and they seem like they might be a good fit, but in terms of your product, but maybe they're not quite. How has that happened to you? And if so, do you go about recommending a vendor that's a more appropriate fit that you sort of have like respect or whatever? Because that sort of is where I'm trending in that sort of space.
So let me just make sure I understood the question. So you're saying because this is sort of a complicated space, do we try to sell to people where we wouldn't actually be the best product for them?
No, I'm saying when they approach you, no. When they are not a good fit and they approach you, do you say, no, you're not a good fit, you should talk with this other vendor?
Right. So the customer's approaching us saying, I want to buy Hadapt, and it's just not a good fit for them.
Do you,
right.
I mean, has that happened to any of you? Has that happened for any of you guys?
Yeah.
And what vendors do you point? You point them to other vendors, or?
Right. I would say it actually does happen quite a bit because I think a lot of people don't have a good appreciation for all the technologies. There's an analyst group called the 451 group. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with them. They just Matt Aslett put out this sort of subway chart of all the different database technologies. It's really cool to look at, but it is also extremely overwhelming and really, I think, visualizes the complexity of the space. So we do run into this question a lot where, first of all, we try to educate the customer on, what's the difference between transactional systems, operational systems, and analytical systems, because we are not a transactional database. We are only analytical, and so we'll run into those issues. So, MongoDB, for example, is purely complementary to what we do. You wouldn't use Mongo for analytics, really, and you wouldn't use us for, keeping your web page running, for example. So, we do a lot of that education, and I think at the end of the day, you want to sell customers, but you don't want you want them to be successful with what they're buying ultimately. So I think that's just again a function of the immaturity of the industry, and I think you would be foolish as a vendor to not do that.
Hi, I'm Kathy O'Neill. I'm a data scientist, but I'm thinking maybe I should change my name since my title doesn't seem to be that well defined. I'm hearing this weird kind of. I'm hearing two things. So I want to talk about how both could be true at the same time. And the first thing I'm hearing is that there's almost like a war between the IT data people and business. And then the other thing I'm hearing is that data scientists are hard to find. And let me make a suggestion for why these both could be true. As a data scientist, I used to be a mathematician. I didn't come to be a data scientist to not be a business person. I consider myself a business person. So to create that dichotomy between the data people and the business people, I think it's false, and it makes there be more friction than there needs to be. One of the problems with that mindset is that data people are expected to just implement things that are already decided by the business. So when mathematicians ask me, how do you become a data scientist, I give them a lot of advice, but one piece of advice I have is if you interview with a business who thinks that you're an implementer and not a business person, then don't take that job. So I just wanted to sort of keep in mind that we don't have to think of this as a war. We should instead think of incorporating data people into the business decisions, and in particular spending a lot of time cleaning the data carefully and asking the questions right. Because as a data person, I see the biggest mistake that business people do is they ask the wrong questions.
Well, I think you're actually totally correct. I mean, I think, honestly, I think you're absolutely correct, and I think that having somebody on the in the data science field that doesn't understand your business it's like having an engineer that doesn't know how to program. Like it's only part of it's like a developer that doesn't know how to program. Rather, it's only part of the equation, right? Like there's a reason that Zena presented sorry, I'm used to calling her Z, and Zena was really odd for me to say. So there's a reason that she presented the ecosystem slide in our talk, and that's because she understands the ecosystem. And it's not fair of us, again, speaking just for simple reasons, it's not fair for us as an organization to ask for insights about the data that we're looking at without understanding the context in which the data is being presented, collected, cleaned, and analyzed. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and if I said anything to the contrary, there's probably me just being funny, and not actually being funny. But I think the problem is that it's not really a disjointed feeling between data science, or math and business. I think it's probably the business side, not the business and or technology side, not properly educating or ensuring the education of the data science side.
Yeah, I think and hopefully this was not what anyone took away from this, but we don't believe that there is necessarily a war between the IT side and the line of business. I think what we're advocating is that there just needs to be a smoother handoff that a lot of these new solutions enable between IT to the line of business, where before it wasn't possible or very difficult or very complex. We need to overcome that and actually deliver solutions and new tools that make this handoff easier. The other aspect of it is I think we need to continue to acknowledge that the skill set of a data scientist will always be deeper than a skill set than many masses of business users, and that they may actually approach this a little bit differently, and their ability to actually drive through data, get to an insight, they just come with a slightly different skill set in how they can do it. So again, it's the job of the new tools and platforms to actually help bridge that problem, as well as smoothen the handoff from IT to the line of business. In fact, it's about breaking down that wall and using the new technologies to help break that wall down, and that's, I think, a lot of what we're doing here, what he's attempting to do.
Great. So we almost at 8 o'clock. So one last question, and then we'll break. So before everybody runs away, so our presenters will be around and available. And if you have more questions, you should absolutely feel free to ask them directly. But one last sort of public question.
Hey guys. This question is directed at the group. My name is Matt Kroll, and I work for 10gen, the MongoDB company. So. First of all, by the way, Sharmila, what you said about there's no war between IT and the business side, I think the building we're standing in is a great example of that, because this building probably wouldn't exist without the IT people who work here. And the hardware.
You will be reinvited.
But Dane, and correct me if I'm wrong, but earlier you said that businesses need data scientists to interpret the data that is coming out of these new systems that the IT side is building, correct?
I'll finish the whole question, then we'll...
Well, yeah, so am I correct in that's what you were saying before?
Yeah, I think, though, that as it's been pointed out, the best business person is a data scientist, the best data scientist is a business person, right?
Yeah, so my question is that I guess I don't understand is that why do you need to hire someone who is called a data scientist, who is this unique category of someone who can interpret all this data, versus just someone who is a subject matter expert who has 30 years of experience in retail, in advertising, in building businesses like the ones your company, Sumall, is trying to advertise to and work with? I mean, why is it that they need a data scientist and not a retail sales expert?
So first off, we use Mongo, so God bless you. Second off, I think that the issue isn't the fact of hiring a specific data scientist role. It's the fact that I've realized that there is a value in the information I'm finally getting my hands on. Right. So this was all obscured to me. I didn't see the different data sets. I finally get some illumination. I realize there's patents here. I theorize there's a hell of a lot more I can do, but I've got to go stack the shelves. Right. I just don't have the capacity. So in this current climate, I think I either need to hire an area expert, I need to hire somebody to spend the time and get more out of this, which, of course, then goes on the job rec as data scientist or industry scientist. But it is that again, the data scientists are going to be the ones that rule the world in the future, right? The best business people we ever work with are scientists in their heads, right? So I think that term is going to blend, and you're going to look for people who have a data background when you're hiring them for a business role. And right now, it's just it's a titling issue. But the great thing is that these companies are realizing there's stuff in that magical sauce, right? To compete against big companies, they need the information to make smarter choices, and they need to get resources beyond what they can shave off time-wise to do. That's cool.
Do you mind if I weigh in on this? So I think that data scientist covers a lot of different jobs and a lot of different teams. And it's hard when you have the sort of existing dichotomies between the different organizations. I would consider myself to be part of the engineering team as well as part of the business team. And I don't see how anyone who considers themselves to be a data scientist could see it any other way. So when you're looking at how we build a product and the analysis that goes into making those product decisions, the business side of things needs to be aware of that process in order to make smart business decisions. So it's not everything. I think the resentment and the idea of the sort of warfare between the groups comes when people live in silos. And I think the great opportunity for data scientists as a business trend is to sort of break down those barriers, because I think that's where the sort of anger and resentment comes from when it does come. But yeah.
Great. So before we break for drinks, a quick few thank yous. So first of all, thanks to Ed over there, who I've never thanked publicly, but has been wonderful. Thank you to Christina, who has been our event planner tonight, and a special thank you to Robin here, who volunteered to do the mics and has no business doing so. She told me that the price for helping out would be that I would mention a Twitter handle in order to increase the number of followers in our cloud score. She's a very entertaining. Almost at 1,000. She's a very entertaining Twitterer, especially on the topic of zombies. And her handle is at A Robin Wood, WOOD. Anyway, thank you very much. And most importantly, thank you to our great presenters tonight. I really appreciate I've really enjoyed this session. Hope you guys did too. As I said, everybody's going to be around for the next hour or so please have a drink, and thanks again, and I'll see you guys on February 20.